I'm Rick Harp. This is your APTN News Brief for Tuesday, April 2nd. The Native Women's Association of Canada is in turmoil. Last week, the organization laid off half its staff, a move it blames on government funding cuts. But as Fraser Needham reports, the layoffs come amid allegations of a toxic workplace.
NWAC CEO Lynn Grew says the organization had no choice but to let go 75 employees, facing a federal government funding cut of $38 million, meaning its budget is going from $48 million to $10 million.
There are decisions that are made by the government to either not renew funding or cut funding, and that decision this year has been very significant for NWAC, much more than previous years.
But a CBC article reports there are other reasons behind the staffing cuts. Unnamed sources make allegations of a hostile work environment and employees fired for starting a union drive. Crystal Samaginis worked for NWAC from 2021 to 2023 and says she is not surprised by the allegations.
Well, the Native Women's Association of Canada is not an Indigenous-led organization. I have been to the headquarters at NWAC several times over the last few years. And what I noticed is that there's very few Indigenous women actually on staff. And I just felt that there was a lot of colonial violence happening within my employment and within, my regular, expectations of being an employee.
Samaginis also says an elaborate new headquarters across the river from Ottawa in Gatineau, Quebec, and a new healing lodge in Chelsea, Quebec, send the wrong message to Indigenous women who are struggling just to make ends meet.
I have been allowed supervised visits to the mansion in the Gatineau Hills. It is over the top, very elaborate with an indoor pool, very, very, 5-star kind of facility, very expensive.
Ellen Gabriel is a former president of Quebec Native Women. She says it appears NWAC has lost its way.
I think more than anything, it makes me feel sad because, the women who started the Indigenous women's rights movement, like Mary 2X Early and all those women, they've really fought hard to get equality of rights for Indigenous women under the Indian Act.
Fraser Needham, APTN National News, Ottawa.
The federal carbon tax has just gone up. As of yesterday, Canadians will now pay that much more upfront for gasoline and home heating fuel, a measure the Prime Minister continues to defend as part of his government's overall climate change strategy.
We are effective in putting a price on pollution that is driving down emissions and leading the way not just in protecting the environment for the future, but on sparking the kinds of innovation and upgrades that companies and individuals are doing to their homes, to their businesses, so that we can be both better for the environment and more competitive.
Trudeau noted that rebates of the tax will also go up, but premiers against the levy say those rebates won't come even close to covering the cost of home upgrades needed to avoid the tax. To northern Manitoba, where the Quw'ut'en Tribal Council now intends to pursue a self-determination agreement, and chiefs from the council's 11 First Nations have just signed a declaration to begin such negotiations. Last March, the council declared a regional state of emergency due to public safety issues, poor health care, and inadequate infrastructure. They urged both the federal and provincial governments to provide immediate support. But according to Grand Chief Walter Wastacekut, those governments failed to serve their peoples, and little has changed in the years since the emergency declaration.
Our communities are remote northern communities who remain in crisis, plagued by an opioid epidemic, chronic underfunding of healthcare services, and inadequate infrastructure. Every week, we are forced to bury our people who have died due to suicide, violence, inadequate medical services, drug overdose, complications from diabetes, and other entirely preventable circumstances under a discriminatory system.
And finally, the territory of Nunavut turned 25 years old yesterday. There to help mark the occasion, Governor General Mary Simon. Trevor Wright reports.
This week, 25 years ago in 1999, the Nunavut Act was passed in Ottawa and separated from the Northwest Territories. Governor General Mary Simon visited Iqaluit as part of the Nunavut 25 celebrations. For many Inuit, reaching this point is an accomplishment all on its own.
You can see the huge advancements we've been able to make, but also obviously the challenges we see. And I am very confident that we will continue to deal with the issues head on.
While this is indeed a milestone, Premier Akioguk says there are still many challenges ahead, the biggest of which is Nunavut's housing crisis.
Things do take time. We've been tackling the lack of housing, the crisis we've seen for decades. So we've been working extremely hard to tackle that head on, and we have been making some huge investments, historic investments, to tackle those issues, because we know at the root of the challenges we see, the social determinants, the health determinants, the education outcome lie with the lack of housing.
In spite of this, the Premier says Nunavut's future is bright, with the signing of the Nunavut Devolution Agreement being just one example of the territory moving forward.
And I feel very much a sense of optimism today, knowing it's really about the future and the incredible youth that we have that are continuing to push so hard for the original vision of what Nunavut was to become.
Trevor Wright, APTN National News, Iqaluit.
And that's your APTN News Brief for Tuesday, April 2nd. I'm Rick Harp.